Well, perhaps we'll get onto that as we ramble about Baby Driver.
Baby Driver. I came to this fresh a couple of nights ago. The problem with mixtapes is that, generally speaking, the only people interested in them are the people making them. Those people fall into three categories. Those with really bad taste in music and don't know it. Those with some taste in music but who are really self-congratulatory about it. And those who are actually worth listening to, or as they are better known, DJs. Baby Driver, which has been described accurately as a mixtape with a movie attached to it, demonstrates nothing so much as that Edgar Wright falls firmly into the middle category. Baby, Ansel Elgort. Is it Elgort? Is that how it's pronounced?
I can't see any other way to pronounce that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like that's trying to subtly trick me. Damn you, Ansel. Anyway, Baby, Ansel Elgort, is a young man with mad skills behind the wheel, plying his trade as a getaway driver for criminal mastermind Doc, Kevin Spacey, to whom he is indebted for a prior vehicular indiscretion. Baby has severe tinnitus as the result of a childhood accident that also claimed his parents' lives, but that's not nearly so important to the plot as the fact that it excuses his constant, socially ignorant use of assorted iPods to provide the movie's soundtrack. If Baby's insistence on being an obnoxious fanny gets on your nerves, you're not alone. Certain members of Doc's rotating crew of assorted criminal misfits find him pretty insufferable too. But as a viewer, it's okay, because Baby looks after his elderly, deaf, wheelchair-bound adoptive dad. So, he's sympathetic. Baby may be great behind the wheel and, as your music guy in the pub quiz team, but he is naive enough to believe that Doc means it when he says his debt is paid in full and he's free to get on with his life. Just as Baby is getting his shiz back on track and falling for diner waitress Deborah, Lily James, he gets dragged back into Doc's next big caper and things start to come apart at the seams for everyone involved. If I sound like Baby Driver annoyed me no end, that would be because it did. But here's the thing. For the first hour, it actually managed to win me over. Somehow, despite delivering a product geared to irritate me in so many ways, Edgar Wright actually managed to make a film that I was enjoying. The cast are pretty good across the board, charisma vacuum Elgort aside, and I was left baffled but also impressed that the likes of Jamie Foxx and John Hamm had accepted third fiddle roles in what was never likely to be a box office phenomenon. Hamm in particular gets bonus points for owning a haircut that probably ought not to work outside of a trailer park, though it's Foxx who steals most of his scenes as a psychotic bats. Apparently, Wright wants everyone to know that this is a movie he had spent 20 years developing, which is a bold flex because you'd better be sure that anything you've spent that long on is pretty flawless. As it stands, Wright probably ought to have spent another 20 years figuring out what he wanted to do with the second half of the movie, because somewhere around the middle, it all kind of falls apart into something quite different. Where the first hour is all show and bravado, the cocky, self-assured kid you kind of can't help but like, the second descends into often quite nasty B-movie territory that rounds out in a less than satisfying conclusion, including, bizarrely, a foot chase, where there really ought to have been a car chase. Remember how this is being marketed as a car chase movie? Yes. It's got maybe 3/4 of a car chase near the start, a half of one a bit further on, and that's about it. There's also a cliched slasher movie rope-a-dope where a villain is presumed dead and magically reappears for a final send-off, which just felt so completely out of place that I wondered if I hadn't momentarily nodded off and my wife put on one of the Halloween sequels instead. That foot chase though, exhilarating stuff. Perhaps most disappointingly, Wright doesn't even have faith in Baby himself, parading a series of character witnesses before a courtroom to remind you that he is a good boy really. And of course, his stunning girlfriend of a whole 2 days waits 5 years for him to be released from Chokey. I also spent a lot of time scratching my head over who within Doc's enterprise turns out to be the redemptive good guy and the ultimate villain, but by this point I don't think I really cared all that much. In spite of myself, I was really enjoying Baby Driver up to a point, and it surely says something that I didn't have to work too hard to set aside my complaints for an hour. I just wish that the movie I finished watching was the same one I had started.
Yeah, I didn't see this on release. I remember trying to watch this, getting about half an hour into it, and then giving up on it at some point in the last couple of years. And this was actually the first time I've seen it all the way through, and I think I'm more or less in your boat. It's fine, but I can't get myself all that excited about it. It's got a lot of style, but it doesn't really have anything much to back it up. Some of the actions, the driving's good, but there's not enough of it, as you say. And Baby's just not compelling enough as a character to kind of carry the rest of it. And the relationship with the girlfriend, as you say, is so slender that it's kind of hard to take it particularly seriously. At the same time, it's not a film I think that is really looking to be taken seriously.
No.
But then you kind of get into the question mark of then what is it for? And I couldn't really answer that question. At the same time, while I would normally wind up with most films being absolutely unwatchable, turns out it's easy enough to get through. I enjoyed it well enough in spite of myself, again, perhaps just because of that cast who are, I should say, just all doing phenomenally well. And at the end of it, I did feel a little bit unsatisfied. It's probably my least favourite of all the films we've talked about here today, including A Fistful of Fingers. It's got a lot more style and professionality, but it doesn't have the same heart, actually, as his very earliest film, which is a strange position to find themselves in. But yeah, I don't know if I can really recommend it, even though I thought it was okay in the ultimate analysis, but yeah, hard to recommend something that I just thought was okay.
Yeah, I like this considerably more than either of you then. I can't actually disagree with most of either of your criticisms, it's just that I enjoyed it a great deal more. I do remember my first viewing, though, being somewhat set on the wrong foot by expecting a comedy.
Yeah.
Which is not. The same thing you were just saying about Edgar Wright in the last film, Craig, in some ways. In this one, I felt the same as like, well, why should I expect this certain thing from Edgar Wright necessarily? Can you try other things,
Yeah, I think you're right though, Drew. I think there is a sort of expectation that there will at least be a certain level of humour to it. But I don't know that is fair to expect that going in, but regardless, that's his reputation as a filmmaker.
Yeah, but I really enjoy. The second half is it feels more like it's Edgar Wright trying to do Tarantino in the second half, and he doesn't have the skills to do that, which is the problem. And the other criticism I have is, I say, one with what seem to all have to, there's no heart there, and also the relationship between Deborah and Baby doesn't work, because again, it's believable enough that they would be get together, just not that quickly.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a problem. And yeah, the other big problem I had with this film is Ansel Elgort, and I don't find him insufferable. The fact that he's sitting listening to his iPod while surrounded by criminals, weirdly enough, doesn't bother me. I don't care that he's rude to them, they're criminals.
Are you neglecting the fact that he also is a criminal though, Drew?
Yes, but he's kind of been forced into this, Craig. I mean,
that is true.
I know he was a joyrider, but that's probably when he was like 12 years old or something.
We've all been there.
I'll give him a pass on that. But yeah, certainly, weirdly enough, watching it though, just this afternoon, I didn't think so much about that end sequence, but when you started saying, Craig, like how they're spelling out how good he is, like, yeah, actually, you're right. That's quite heavy-handed. That was unnecessary.
Oh, it's so on the nose. It's unreal.
It's weird that didn't bother me, because that's the sort of thing you usually would, but it didn't this time. But when you mentioned it, it's like, oh yeah, that was kind of dumb. Yeah, I think the biggest problem is Baby Driver himself, and I don't actually think it's Ansel Elgort, because I've not really seen anything else I can think of to compare.
No, I was thinking this earlier. He's a total non-entity to me. I don't really know anything about him.
He's such a non-entity in the film. He's so anonymous, but that's the way the character's written, because he's written as this person who's so withdrawn and listening to his iPod all the time. But because it isolates him so much from the rest of the world, it isolates him from the audience as well. And it's a failing in the script, I feel, rather than a failing in the acting there. I mean, maybe some other character would have maybe been able to display a bit more charisma, but I really think the limitation is the script. The way that character is written, I'm not sure there's a lot you could do with it.
Did this movie need Michael Cera?
But it's... there's a lot of like technical stuff that I really like, though, the matching of gunshots to the rhythm of music, and there's bits like that I really like. Again, his technical stuff is really appealing.
This is the absolute pinnacle of that thing he's been trying to do in other films on a scene by scene basis, where he's trying to match the action to the rhythm of music.
Absolutely,
and that's the one thing that he does succeed at. That like every single gunshot in this film is synced to the soundtrack.
It's almost word for word what I said when we did this back in 2017 when I covered it then, Craig.
Yeah.
And that's really satisfying. And there are other little kind of technical flourishes in there too that I don't think you realise it, but there's a hum of tinnitus through the entire film. It never goes away.
Yeah.
It starts with the Sony logo when it appears at the start of the film, and it's not always obvious because it's been drowned out by the sound, but it's always there. And so, like, just wee touches like that, it's like that I match the character and what's happening to him.
Yeah. Unfortunately, every film's like that for me, so it doesn't really have the same impact.
I'm not sure what the value of that is, though.
Maybe. I just think it fitted the character, and I appreciated that. Yeah, but I still really enjoy this. It's not brilliant, but it's very enjoyable. It's very well produced. I guess this is what you were talking about earlier, though. You're saying the general just being somewhat out of his element doing American stuff, whereas like he seems to really know the British milieu a bit better.
Oh, that's the thing, though. And I think that's what confused me so much about this, is that, yes, if this was just off the success of his other films, Hollywood had come knocking on his door and said, right, okay, we need you to make this before we let you do another one of your little English movies with a decent budget or whatever, then I could understand that. But it's the fact that he himself has said this is something that's been sitting in my head for 20 years. It's just something doesn't really register there. And it's all based on, and the movie starts with that sort of bank heist opening, right? And you know how it's supposed to, the whole setup is that thing, that scene of him sitting in the car and tapping the outside of the car and stuff to the rhythm of the music in his headset. That whole scene just didn't work for me. That was really annoying, and I think that was actually one of the worst edited scenes in the film. It came across as really unnatural and really forced, and it's all off the back of. Have you seen the music video he directed for Mint Royale? That is basically the sort of the first pass at this.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've seen it, Scott. Yeah. So he directed a music video for Mint Royale, and I can't remember what track it was, Drew, but it's Blue something or other. And basically, it's Noel Fielding as a getaway driver. And I think, is Nick Frost in it, Scott?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes. So it's Noel.
That in this film.
There is, yeah. When he's flicking through the TV channels, there's a quick shot of Noel Fielding there. So he directed this music video for Mint Royale, and everybody lost their shit for it. And I don't know why. Because I've watched that and there is nothing special about that video whatsoever. It's Noel Fielding sitting in a car tapping his hands in time to music for 3 minutes, and that's it. I don't understand what the big deal is.
I think I have seen that, but to be honest, I was more irritated that it was Noel Fielding existing, which is
exactly
something I care for.
It sticks in my craw that Noel Fielding is a part of that because it's Noel Fielding, and that seems to be. It was at a point at which, off the back of the Mighty Bush and stuff, I think that people were just in love with Noel Fielding in general. So for whatever reason, he was sort of had plaudits piled on him for this completely innocuous music video that, as far as I'm concerned, shows no creativity or sort of technical merit whatsoever, beyond the fact that he had someone tapping their hands to the same beat as some music. Here's the news: I could do that tomorrow in iMovie myself.
It's weird though, because he does actually do well in this film. It does work.
It does work. It does work in a broader context of the film, and I can't remember where I was going by piling on this music video. But I think if so, that initial scene, it just doesn't work. I don't think it works, and I think it's just a big misstep that this is sort of a passion project for him that has been, I think, completely misdirected. And certainly the second half of the script does not bear out. And you hit the nail on the head, Drew, where he thinks he's making a Tarantino movie, certainly in the second half of this film, and it just doesn't sit with the material we're used to for Edgar Wright. And I don't believe that this is something. I believe that the first half of this movie is something that he had in his head for 20 years, but I do not for 1 minute believe he knew what he was doing with the second half until he got the funding for this, and then actually had to sit down and write it out, because it sort of devolves into this sort of like really sort of nasty, violent movie that completely betrays the first half. And for all the for all the stuff that I really wasn't on board with in the first half, there was something about the story and the prospect of this being a really well choreographed technical exercise, and even some flourishes in that first initial kind of half a car chase that we get, that meant I was sort of going into the second half of this movie looking forward to what the culmination of that was going to be. And you can tell that he's been influenced by Tarantino in the dialogue. You know, Kevin Spacey's line about, oh, he's got a hum in the drum and all this. It was all very self-aware and very smart arse kind of dialogue going on. But I kind of bought into it, and it kind of won me over. And I thought, yeah, actually, yes, I want to see how this works out. And all right, okay, so Tarantino apparently, and again, this is not something that I completely understand, but everybody lost their shit about how Tarantino was using licensed music to drive film scores and stuff, as if that was something that had never been done before. And he's bought into that wholesale, and I don't know what it is, but I just think it's a weak. The second half of this movie just felt weak. It felt like it completely undercut what happened in the first half. I don't understand that John Hamm was his character was set up as being somewhat sympathetic towards Baby, but he turned out to be the bad guy. Kevin Spacey in the first half of this movie is obviously a complete asshole who lies to Baby and who draws him back into this life of crime and threatens to kill everybody that he loves if he doesn't do the job for him. Yet in the last 10 minutes of this film, he's massive redemptive character. Yeah. Those two felt the wrong way round for me. I felt I knew that John Hamm was going to be the character who gave him the out, and who maybe knew that he was going to end up dead, but sort of that his last act of redemption might be at giving Baby a second shot at having a successful life. And it just felt like a really weird switch. It just felt like an idea that was in search of a second half, to be honest.
It certainly doesn't make sense the way those characters went. It's like, was he trying to subvert our expectations, which is a very much a of the now phrase? But
yeah, and there would be nothing wrong with doing that, but I just, because it
doesn't make any sense in that context, though.
Yeah, is it a contextual thing? Am I right about that? Because there's also an argument. There is an argument to be said that if it had played out the way I expected, that might just be lazy script writing. But I feel like at that point in the movie, Drew, if I'm like, right, okay, I feel like this has been set up for this, it just feels dishonest to switch on that, as opposed to satisfying to let it play out the way that I thought it was going.
I mean, certainly set up. There's Elsa Gonzalez's character says that when they're sitting in the diner, says to Bats, like, basically, if you've never seen Buddy angry, if you get him angry, it's never going to stop.
Yeah.
And I had actually forgotten how he dispatched Bats, the Jamie Foxx character.
Yeah.
So I'd forgotten that, and so I thought, it's going to be John Hamm that takes care of him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, but the fact that they then... So, from that point of view then, because they've set that up, like, they've had her say that.
Yeah. I expected John Hamm to kind of take the father role.
Yeah, but then something happens to her, and he's like... Because, yes, he seems sympathetic and interested in Baby before then.
Yeah.
But the fact that Monica dies, and so he's going to basically lose his mind, go mad. Okay, I'll buy that. They've set that up. But it's the whole Kevin Spacey character doesn't make sense. That's what bothers me more, because...
That hasn't been earned.
Well, yeah, but absolutely it doesn't make any sense, because he's basically forcing this person to work for him.
Yeah, half an hour before he's threatened to break his legs and kill everybody that he loves.
Here you go, have a bag of money. And he's already shown by killing the Korean guy just before, towards the start of the film, that... or at least being involved in his death, that
he's absolutely ruthless.
Yeah, and he says also, but you have to go and dispose of this body. So it's like,
exactly.
It doesn't make any sense, that. And it does bother me, that second half. It's the violence bothers, because the violence doesn't fit with the start of the film.
Yeah.
At least, had it been, for instance, Jamie Foxx's character is the one violent person, and because he's always afraid of him.
Yeah.
Okay, but the fact that everybody gets violent in the end, you're right, it's like a completely different film.
Yeah, if Jamie Foxx had been the danger, I could have seen that, because there was, at that point, halfway through the film, you're like, okay, there's this really ominous sense of foreboding building up, because Jamie Foxx's character is clearly unhinged, and he really doesn't care about killing anybody. And there's the insinuation that he's thinking about killing Deborah in that scene in the restaurant.
Going to kill her just because he doesn't want to pay the bill.
Yeah, and John Hamm, exactly. And John Hamm makes some comment about the fact that, listen, you're doing this, this, and this, and I've got to worry about this Bats guy. And it's like, okay, that's getting taken care of in the background. John Hamm's character knows what Jamie Foxx's character is all about, and there's going to be some sort of really satisfying resolution there. Nothing whatsoever.
Yeah, it's the fact that the baby takes care of him, I actually really quite like, because that's unexpected. But he realizes a danger to him.
Yes, it's almost him shaping up and at some point realizing the situation he's in, and there's only one way out of it.
But then if like John Hamm's like, oh well done, kid, I don't have to do that, then that's great. Yeah, it's a bit disjointed for something he's apparently been working on for 20 years. And I still really do enjoy it. Silly far more than either you or Scott. But it's making me think that maybe he should have kept that to himself. There's something, Scott, maybe you can remind me, because I can't think what it is, but a film we talked about really recently where it had been like a passion project for a director and they'd probably been working on for 30 years, but I think we both kind of felt that, yeah, basically he'd been kind of noodling on it.
Wasn't it Mrs. Brown's Boys, the movie?
I pretend that thing doesn't exist because I prefer to think anything to do with that television program doesn't exist.
I'm off your Christmas card list now, aren't I?
But I don't know if you remember what that film was, Scott. It was quite recent, but it feels like maybe this is something like that, yeah, it's an idea he had 20 years ago and had vague notions of doing it for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's not the same as working on it for 20 years.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I wish I could think what that film was, but it was very recent too.
Was it something you discussed on one of the podcasts?
Yeah, that's why I'm asking if Scott remembers. It was something really quite recent, and like it'd been allegedly a passion project for the director, but actually it felt more like maybe he'd done it in his off time every now and then.
It wasn't Don Quixote, was it?
No, because that one actually felt like something that somebody had been working on. You knew from Lost in La Mancha. No, maybe it was something to do with James Cameron somehow, but I can't think what it would be. But it's annoying.
Alita Battle Angel, maybe.
But anyway, yeah, it's like I don't believe that Edgar Wright was waiting 20 years to make this. It's maybe like he had the idea 20 years ago and never really got to
do
anything.
And then he made a music video out of it and had some ideas about how he would spin that out.
It is absolutely Alita Battle Angel. Yeah, sure. I'm just checking our very own website. I don't think it suffers quite as much from that because it's not as strong an idea as Alita Battle Angel should have been. Oh, sorry, Battle Angel Alita. It still annoys me they changed the name. It's stupid. Battle Angel Alita. But yes, it's like keep that to yourself unless you know you got something spectacular.
Yeah,
because you kind of sound foolish.
Yeah, I have all sorts of comments I want to make about this, and I wrote them down earlier and then I deleted them because I realised they just sounded obnoxious because they were basically piling on Edgar Wright for his choice of music as well. I think going back to the mixtape thing, I know that's a criticism that's been levelled at him, and I actually think it's justified, but I had all sorts of specific thoughts on his choices that I realised really in terms of I was being picky about him in terms of his what I perceived to be his musical education as opposed to what I actually would know would be his musical education, which would be absolutely zero, and in the context of him then applying that to a big budget mainstream movie where I think I was perhaps being unrealistic in my expectations. So I decided to shut up about that because I would have come across as being an obnoxious dick myself if I haven't already.
I'm not sure if that stunning silence after that was comment or not.
I was a bit worried by it, to be honest with you, yeah, but there you go.